advances in the data that we have and the methods we have of communicating them to people as well. The expectations of end users. So I think people's expectations change as the technology by which they receive their forecasts change, but maybe not so much. I think there's always an expectation for forecasters to get it right. And then perhaps have a look what might be next in the world of communication. So look at the state of that. I've still got my original past photograph from those 17 years and 2 days ago. Don't ask me why, but there we go. That was me, my first day or so at Meteor Group, as it is called now. So back then, when I joined, my tasks were to produce weather forecasts for a range of clients, primarily page-ready, so weather forecasts that you'll read in your newspaper. And of course, they're still around today. So that's one thing that has been somewhat constant, has been the newspaper-type forecast. You need to write it in a sort of style, sort of fairly plain English style, in a way that people are going to understand what your message is. You have a fairly small space in which to write it, so you can't waffle on and on for a long time. And it's the constraints of the customer, which ultimately in those cases is the newspaper. Now, most newspapers fund themselves these days more by advertising, so they don't have a great deal of space for something like a weather forecast. So then you might have 5 words to describe the whole UK's weather for the next day or the next week. So it's a bit of an art. There's an art there in communicating it. And of course, that extends much more, of course, onto broadcast as well. But it's still there when you read it, in a way, it's the meteorologist is still performing to the audience there just by the written word instead of being up on the TV in front of them. We had a piece of software called Weathercast. That name has sort of carried on. Our Facebook page is called Weathercast. I'm not entirely sure why, but there you go. I'm not into marketing. But in those days, this was quite revolutionary at the time. It had radar on it, a 15-minute radar. The internet was only really beginning to come alive, so people actually downloaded the software. Well, actually didn't download, of course. They got it on a CD. Do you remember those? And put them onto their computers, and then, of course, they used a modem to dial into the internet or whatever, and it downloaded the data onto their computer, and they had radar, and there was no real other place to get, as a consumer then, radar on your own device. You watched it on the TV, but there weren't really any other ways. Websites were only just starting to come around at that time with good data on them. We produced forecast text for that as well, but we also had, quite a bit of semi-automated data going onto that as well. So that's one thing that was starting to push data towards the consumer, and they could tailor what they wanted to see on there to some degree as well. And we produced forecasts for transport authorities, so local authorities who go out sorting the road networks in the winter. We started with just one client. Back then we have many clients now. But again, that's where we started focusing on more specific things. So the general forecast to a member of the public, wet, dry, hot, cold, windy, calm, those kind of things are important. When you start getting down to the nitty-gritty of, that's a really, I didn't mean to make some sort of pun there, but gritting the road network, you have to start looking at other things, the temperature of the road surface, the moisture content of the atmosphere, will frost form on the road, will there be snow, and then how much snow? The authorities need to know whether to fit a plough or not. If you have more than a certain depth of snow on the road, you need to fit snow ploughs, but it's a costly, time-taking exercise to sit there and fit 10, 15 lorries with snow ploughs. They don't run around with them on all the time because they tend to dig speed humps up and things like that. So let's fast forward through to now, and there's me again in front of a tornado in just 2 years ago in Texas. So what do we do these days? Excuse me. So we have, quite a myriad of different things that we push towards our customers these days. And the customers can either be paying customers for taking services from us, like transport customers, or they can be consumers as well. And perhaps I'll come on to the consumer aspect in a moment. A lot of products, though, rely on automated or semi-automated delivery of weather data. Now, that's not the same as data that's just raw model data. There's 2 things that go on. There's post-processing of model data using various algorithms, techniques, statistical post-processing, other types of post-processing. And there's also the meteorologist being able to intervene in the weather forecast as well. So by taking the data that has had some processing done to it, and then perhaps shaping that. So maybe increasing the probability of showers or punching holes in the cloud if perhaps the models have got a bit too much cloud in them and things like that. So there's an element of post-processing that goes in there. We talked about fog. John brought up fog earlier on. It's very tricky for models to forecast fog, and I'm not saying it's easy for a human to do it, but perhaps the human has some techniques at their disposal or understands certain areas might be at risk of fog. So perhaps can push up the chance of fog in certain patches, again, to add value to those models. But I'd say the key change really is not so much the process of going through the weather forecasting per se, but it's the amount of data that is available to the end user. Now, if you're a certain type of client, you can tailor it. We can tailor it to the client's requirements, basically. This isn't a sales pitch, by the way, but it's just to give you an idea. The top right one there, for example, is an idea of what a road product might look like for a highways engineer. So, again, colour coding it so that the client can get an idea and working with the client to see what the best colouring is or the best sort of way of displaying it is for them so that they can make the informed decisions from it as well. But it's still a challenge, isn't it? Even then, when you've got so much data, how does the client wade through it all? And that's why we have to sort of make sure that we're only displaying stuff that's relevant for them. When you get onto the consumer, though, the implications are somewhat greater because there's all manner of weather information out there now. Any piece of data here, whilst not necessarily appearing exactly like this, is available for people to just be able to go out and find on the internet. So a weather app like ours or any other, there's quite a number of weather apps out there now. Of course, even those have got plentiful data on there. Satellite pictures, you can go online and just pick up a satellite picture. Temperature observations for the last few days, upper air charts or surface weather maps, radar maps, tables of data. It's all out there really in the sort of weird wide world of the internet, and without some sort of explanation to the end users about what data it is they're seeing, I think that's partly where people feel like they get conflicting weather forecast information from. It's not that they're getting bad weather forecasts. We know as a sort of I guess professionals, scientists, etc. We know that forecasts are getting better, and we keep telling people forecasts are getting better. But if people have the feeling they're not, or they're getting overrun with data, then that in itself is, I wouldn't say it's a failing, but we have to understand that. We have to educate people. We have to do that via perhaps putting more pieces of information in apps, for example, or on websites, saying to people, this is what you're looking at, this is what it means. But of course, there's anyone can start a website, anyone can go on Facebook and start a Facebook weather page and start producing forecasts, and then some people will suddenly say, this is the best forecaster in the world for this patch of the earth. And maybe they are for that patch of the earth, but people don't really have any idea whether that's true or not. And another topic, of course, is the verification. How well have we done? It's, again, as I say, it's all very well us saying the forecasts are getting better, but we need to show people that what does it mean that we get the forecast temperature right 95% of the time or something like that. What does that mean to the end user? If you're a highways engineer and we say we predict the road surface temperature the correct side of zero or a certain percentage amount of time, that's great. They say, okay, that's brilliant. A higher number must be better. But of course, then you might, what if you've missed the biggest snow event of the year, but that isn't contained in the verification statistics? Again, you can't manipulate the stats. People have to understand what it is they're looking at. So I think a case in point about communicating, for example, taking a weather symbol. If you have your app there, and there's many apps have weather symbols on there, they can be useful, they can be not useful, depending on the weather situation. So let's pick a weather situation. This isn't in this year's photographic competition. Maybe it'll be in next year's. But this was in Oklahoma this year. Anyone guess what was it showing? Anyone want to shout out? Supercell, that's right. It's a supercell thunderstorm, hail core coming down there quite nicely. That isn't the point of this. It's just to show it off. But I want a show of hands in a minute. I'm going to show you 4 weather symbols, and I want a show of hands for each one. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is number 1. Which is the most appropriate symbol? So we've got a sunshine and shower symbol. Ignore the triangle in it. That was just on there. We've got a fair symbol. We might call that fair. We've got a thunderstorm and shower symbol with a bit of sun peeking out the side. And we've got a sunshine symbol. So starting from the top, symbol 1. Who'd pick symbol 1 to describe the weather for the area? Nope. Symbol 2? Symbol 3? Symbol 4? It's interesting. Not everyone's hands went up, so maybe symbol 5 is in there somewhere that I haven't found out yet. Of course, it depends exactly where you are, and that's the thing, because what are you using the weather symbol to describe? Are you using it to describe the area? So, this place in Oklahoma, the 15 square miles or 20 miles or whatever around the area, then of course the thunderstorm and sunshine symbol would be the most appropriate, because there's a thunderstorm there, but there's sunshine there as well. If you live down the road 25 miles, you can see a glorious cloud up to the north, but above you it's gloriously sunny. So either round sun, as we might call it at the bottom, or fair, number 2, would actually be the most appropriate weather symbol there. So there are good and bad things about these sort of methods of communication. And I'm not going to suggest I know the answer now, but this is just to show that weather symbols can be useful in giving you a flavour, but they don't convey the sort of probabilities of things happening. And there's probabilities is a whole different topic as well, which we've heard about already, of course. But the point here is that a lot of weather apps, for example, are using some form of point data, perhaps geolocated to the phone user's location, but it's using point-based data to generate a forecast for them. And whilst we know the forecasts are getting better and better, and for something like a front moving through, you could probably get really good guidance by these. Rain for a few hours, then sunshine behind it. On a day of sunshine and showers, well, the shower symbol might be most appropriate, but then if someone has a series of showers passing to their north, one after the other, and they stay dry all day, then they'll say, well, I cancelled my plans today because it showed rain all day. Well, actually, it was showing shower symbols. But as far as they were concerned, it's a wrong forecast, even though we might argue till we're blue in the face that it isn't. And just to move on, overall, I think it depends on the end user's expectations, and that depends on their use cases. So, for example, grid operators, those people that bring the electricity into your house, winter roads clients, they have very specific things they're looking for. So for a grid client, they're looking for strong winds, lightning, things that are going to disrupt the power. And can we give them guidance on that? Probably about 95% of the year, the day-to-day weather is fine for them. So they're not really interested in whether it's sunshine and showers per se. But if the showers might produce lightning and they've got people out there working on the network, suddenly it becomes important. Again, with winter road clients, they're not interested when it's, they're somewhat interested when it's 10 degrees because they don't have to go out spending money, but they're not too worried. But when it starts getting close to 0 and below, they have to then start spending money, going out sorting the road network, or making decisions about the risk-cost thing. And the risk is obviously much bigger by not doing anything, but if they were so risk-averse, they'd just go out and spread salt on the road every night of the winter and not worry about weather forecasts. But that would be very expensive and damaging to the environment because salt is poisonous, basically, in large quantity. Energy traders, so they're interested, we heard a little bit about earlier on, in buying and selling energy on the futures market. So your energy price, is dictated somewhat by buying and selling of energy. You see some cold weather is out there 10, 15 days ahead, you buy up a load of energy, a load of gas maybe, and then sell it when the price goes up. It does allow organisations to make money, and in the end, probably reduce the costs a little bit. And then there are consumers, you and I, with our apps, and our expectations perhaps are unreasonably high. As a user looking at it, I want it to tell me exactly what's going to happen. But I don't have any specific use case. I just want everything in one place. And I think that's the thing. When you have a defined thing that you're interested in, then it's easy to home in and give you a product, and probably you understand it well. When it's just everything in one place, then I think that's where the communication is difficult. And I don't think us as an industry are there yet in truly being able to communicate it fully with people. And just to finish off, what's next? I don't want to go through every single one of these things. It sounds like buzzwords, but things like big data, Internet of Things, you might not even know have heard of it before, or what it means, but it's using data to drive forecasts or some types of forecasts without necessarily understanding what's behind it totally. It sounds to sort of bash in the face of science in a way, but if you've got a great way of predicting the way a certain weather event goes by studying certain things and sticking it into a huge statistical thing, do you really need to deeply understand what it is if you can actually predict it better by doing this than physically modelling it? That's a rhetorical question in a way. Real-time feedback verification, some apps already allow you to, how is our forecast doing? Allows you to tap there and then and feed back what's going on. In the States have this thing called MPing, where people on their phones can say what type of precip is falling down. Is it hail? What size is the hail? And so it can feed back in and they can verify the radar algorithms, what's going on there. More frequently updated data. I think people get more and more of that. Everyone's getting more and more model runs. Does it have to be pushed to them? I don't know. Probably not all of it. Probabilistic data, we've talked about that. And finally, user-defined thresholds. Maybe allow the user to actually, what's important to them. They define it. They build their app effectively from the data, and we don't just shove everything at them in one go. So I think there are many things, very exciting things that's coming up in the future. But what is definitely true is that you won't get away from needing to explain it to people. And I think if I were to look back and say how my role has changed over the last 17 years, it's gone from writing weather forecasts, and conveying it in that sense, to actually being more of a sort of an explainer of the data. The data is very good these days in a lot of cases. Okay, some editing of the data still, but more about explaining what it means to people and how it might affect them. Not necessarily what they should do, depends who the audience is, but overall it's about explaining the data, I think, and what it actually means to people. And that was in Nebraska a few weeks ago. Any questions? Thank you. Be kind.
I will be kind, of course. One of the things you didn't say at the end, but I'm interested in wondering if you think this is going to be a problem, is this mania in the US, which is starting, I think, to filter here for hyper-local apps. What do you think about that?
Hyper-local, that is an exciting phrase, isn't it? There are ways of being able to do stuff like that. So, for example, being able to forecast rain in the next 15, 20, 30 minutes. There are already apps out there that will do that from the radar information. And a lot of the times they can do pretty well. If you've got a shower moving towards you, as long as you don't present it sort of 3, 4, 5 hours in advance and use the radar that far ahead to try and forecast it. If you've got a shower 15, 20 minutes up the road, it's more than likely going to move over you in the direction it's moving at the moment. Not all the time, but probably enough times that if you have an app that looks at that, it can give you a short warning that it's about to rain. Whether it can do it for everything is more difficult. For example, a hyperlocal tornado warning isn't really going to happen anytime soon. Obviously, tornadoes are hyperlocal, but you're only going to get that just as it's happening now already. But I think for things like that, it's only temperature forecasts, I think, are much better for very local areas. But yeah, there's certain buzzwords do seem to creep across the Atlantic.
Okay, I'm going to just move as well. Thank you very much again, Paul.
Thank you.
The final bit today is going to be given by Ross Midland from the Met Office, and again, this is going to be a little bit of a forward look about what possibilities there might be in the future for how we present and communicate weather information.
I'm going to try my pocket. I kind of wish I was presenting using the chalkboards and the OHP. The OHP is particularly exciting. I've not seen one of those for ages. But I'm not. I'm using my Mac. Cool, thank you. Yeah, idea. Right, so give me a shout if I start lasering you, because I get pretty trigger happy during these presentations. So I'm probably aiming at you, actually, John. But thank you, Andrew and Liz, for having me here. There have been some amazing presentations. I know I'm up last and it's late, but try and stick with me, because hopefully I'll say a few interesting bits along the way. I can't promise. So, who am I? It feels like a deep question, but in fact, essentially I head up design and video production at the Met Office. I'm helping to plan, prepare, and produce that content, basically, on a day-to-day basis. I'm trained in Flash and Director, but I'm not going to talk about that, because that ages me a little bit, and you can begin to work out how old I am. So what I'm going to talk about is the fact that I love designing for social, and I also love designing badges, strangely enough. And I think the two are weirdly connected, and it's that kind of love of designing something in a small space and trying to communicate a message in a very small and succinct way. So what's coming up? Well, who knows, to be honest. So let's just crack on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our team to start with. So very small team with a real mix of skills. So as you can see, we're kind of deemed content producers. We specialise in different areas. So we've got script writers, presenters, designers, camera operators, and technicians, as it says. But we have upskilled in-house, and we're constantly learning. So in particular, at the minute, we're having to learn around animation. Animation is an increasingly popular way of communicating on social. So we're really training in-house and cross-training as well. So good example of that is that we can all pick up a camera and turn it on if we need to. So a great incident occurred when we were trying, I think it was around Storm Doris actually, and we were thinking of doing a Facebook Live, but actually our cameramen were away and one of them was ill. So what we had was the design manager, George, on camera. We had our senior designer holding the boom, and we had me running around trying to sort out all the tech problems. So like, it really fills and fits in with our motto of just getting stuck in where, as and when needed, basically. So being able to really work each other's roles is great for resilience. And we do loads of stuff. So we do video, graphics, animations. We've also got a broadcast quality TV studio, so we're able to service our commercial customers like Channel 5 and British Forecast TV, all with the aim of educating and informing. And then I'm treeing up, and I'm going to have to read it, which is really bad of me, but of the Met Office overall purpose of protection, prosperity, and well-being. So we're really treeing up to that message all the time. And it's important to remember that as we go throughout. So how do we do that at the Met Office? Well, and you might wonder why I've put these kind of scribbles up. And it's basically me trying to actually sum up what we do. I came up with visualizing data. I came up with explaining things. I came up with engaging in conversations. Actually, I'm showing this because this is my initial kind of workings of what story I was going to tell you today. So storytelling is a bit of a buzzword, but I think what I mean by storytelling is really how the hierarchy of information and kind of the narrative of the information. So how we actually structure that story in that sense and tell a kind of logical explanation of what's happening. So I will talk about storytelling in different ways. We got to recognise that not everybody gets their forecast from the TV anymore. So that's nothing new. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but there's a real fragmentation of what's gone on and where people access information in general. It'll also be no surprise that the biggest areas of growth have been in the ones that I've just highlighted in this kind of red colour. And what that means to the Met Office is that we've actually got lots of different things happening in lots of different places, which is great, because what we're doing is going where the conversation is. So we're making sure that we're part of that conversation and we're giving people touch points that are relevant to them and how they use and experience information. All, again, with the aim of informing, inspiring, or engaging. So what we're trying to do is really portray our information in a clear and consistent way, and that's so that people can listen to us and that they trust us and that they act upon our advice where necessary, basically. And we also recognise that different age, again, nothing new, different age groups use different platforms. Not everybody uses all the platforms. So what we're doing, we're trying to reach as many people as possible by covering as many places that people are. The one thing that is missing, actually, that I realised was a big error when I was designing these slides is that there's also, I'm using the pointer correctly, it's also this kind of partnership and partner content and partner channels. So we also syndicate our content to the media as well. This is a great way of controlling that message, so making sure that it's our message on their channels. So there's an example of some of the things that happen. So it's not everything happens on all the channels. You know, we use it for certain things. For example, Twitter's Nowcast or Engage, Snapchat's around the kind of wow or behind the scenes stuff. So as I mentioned, we have got an incredible amount of followers across our social channels. And again, these things are nothing new, but it means that there's a fight for space. There's loads of different places that you can get the forecast. I'm always aware that when I present in any way about the work that you're doing and the work that the Met Office is doing, that it sounds really rosy. Well, actually, it's actually really tough because it's a continually changing landscape. You cannot afford to stand still. Things are changing every single week around do GIFs loop on Facebook? In fact, can you even use a GIF on Facebook? No, I don't think you can. It's MP4. Will it loop? Yes, if it's under 30 seconds. You know, we've got to keep on top of all of these different things. And also that there are new and emerging channels that people are engaging with and interacting with. Snackable content is a thing. I've got the attention span of a newt, so I mean, I barely can remember what I've been talking about, but 8 seconds is apparently the average. There's also, so this is a kind of general trend, as we all know, that kind of information and the way people consume it, particularly on their timeline, is that they just whiz past stuff. So if you're not grabbing them with that kind of interesting, relevant content, then they're moving on. There has, interestingly, also been a rise in kind of longer form content. So there's a place for both, and I'll touch on longer form content in a little bit as well. This kind of echoes some of the stuff that's been said already. So when we're creating that content to try and be relevant and timely to people, creating timely sort of content, we need to really ask these questions. And it's not just asking these questions of ourselves, but it's ideally asking the user as well and the audience. So why do people care? It doesn't matter if I know loads of stuff about something. Does the person that's receiving it actually care about what that is? What do they want to know? How are we telling him? One that I've missed, actually, is how can we make someone care? You know, is this bit of information actually really important, but the person doesn't care about it? We actually need them to care about it, so there's something there as well. And then things around, do we want them to do something as a result of this information? Do we need them to act or listen to our advice and then do something? So we need to ask these things constantly. So we create two different types of content, basically. It's a really, really quick way of defining what we do. So the reactive stuff is the day-to-day stuff. So it's the weather story. Is it hot today? Is it cold today? Is there a hurricane? What are people talking about in general? But then we create the evergreen stuff. That's the kind of longer life stuff that explains a bit more about the sort of weather and why it's happening, basically. So it's the kind of a bit more in-depth content. And I'll talk a little bit about each now. So the reactive stuff, we have a morning editorial and an evening editorial. And what I mean by editorial is basically a gathering. So the Met Office is huge, loads of people working there. So we get the right people every single morning into a space. It's a mix of meteorologists, scientists, experts in certain fields, me, and content producers in general. And we talk about and we agree what the story is that day. We don't just talk about the weather, though. The really important thing is that we're thinking about what else is going on in the world and what else people are really interested in. Is there any kind of tie-in or anything relevant with what's going on with the weather that makes what we're going to communicate and talk about even more important to them? So we look days, weeks, sometimes months ahead. It's UK and global. The really important thing there is that there's a consistent message for all of our communications throughout that day. And here's a little glimpse into the world of that board, basically. So you can see at the top here, we're talking about, right, what's the forecast for today? Are there any warnings? Give me the nitty-gritty of the kind of interest of what's going on up here. It really helps not actually understanding anything about the weather, you know, because I can really get to the bottom of actually, are you talking jargon or are you actually making anything make sense to me as a kind of average user, I would say. And then we look at kind of events. What are people talking about in general? For some reason, they were talking about Scott Mills that day. And then we look at what else is going on. And then this is the first glimpse of how we start splitting our content. So we take the story and split it across the different channels. I mean, a couple of years ago, the mantra was make once, use many. You just can't do that now. It's just as simple as that. You can use elements of those different things, but there's no one size does not fit all. You can't flow one thing across all the channels anymore, which is both exciting and hard work. So we also look at what's coming up for the year as well. So are there any notable events, any campaigns, any themes? We've kind of got our eye on the bigger picture and the kind of longer game as well. But to be honest, this is also hard work because weather gets in the way. It's just broken something as well. So we know that people don't use all of our platforms, but what we do know is that we've got different formats that suit the different channels and platforms that we put stuff out on. So I'm actually going to stop saying platforms, I'm going to say channels, because what I mean is Facebook, Twitter, etc. So we've got different formats to fit those because it increases the speed of delivery. It also means that people can recognize the sort of communication that you're doing, but it also ties in with trends as well. So how do people like to receive that information? So we're able to tailor our content to the different channels. The good thing about having a 24/7 operation is that we're able to put out content around the clock. So if something happens in the middle of the night, we're able to actually talk about it. And the whole idea of it being relevant is that it's also timely. So there's no point if it's going to snow overnight, there's no point us at 6 o'clock all going home and then not talking about it again until 8 o'clock the next morning. We're actually able to fill in those gaps as well. Making sure we're part of that conversation. This bit's really important, and this is something that we're working towards and can't stress enough, to be honest. So much so that I've gone against the brand guidelines that I kind of oversee and used a different font. So the mobile phone is really important. You know, if you take your mobile phone out your pocket and unlocked it and passed it to the person next to you, you probably feel incredibly uncomfortable. Because it's your life, it's your world, it's most people's world. It's not everyone's world, I accept that, but it is becoming everyone's world. You can see there, I started writing, it's relied upon from the moment we wake up. But in fact, it's the thing that wakes us up as well, to be fair. I've used hyperconnected as well, and I've got no idea what it means, but it's awesome. And this is a first look at how we take that story that I was talking about. So the idea that we've got a story, we know what the story for the day is. There's one way of presenting it. One way of presenting it is text. There's another way of presenting it that works better on Twitter. And it's a simple animation that's just talking through that story, taking some of the points. There's another way of presenting it which will work well across Snapchat and Instagram stories. And this is where stories gets complicated, because I'll talk about the story format in a minute. But again, it's just making sure that you're communicating this in different ways that work for the channel. If this was severe weather, we might also use a live or a Facebook Live in particular. That's had great success for us, particularly as we're trying to reach as many people as possible. So one we did around snow earlier in the year, we had around 2,000 live viewers, but then overnight that went up to almost 500,000 views of that content. What a great way to attract and to get the message out to as many people as possible. And I say that we're learning today. I've learned from the technician that's here today a different way that we can use multiple cameras and put in different elements and use an app that actually helps bring that information together that will be able to communicate it even more clearly. So, I mean, it's changing. The world is changing at such a pace, you've got to keep up with it. And then we've got the kind of traditional presentation of the forecast as well. Again, storytelling is the key to this. So Alex is an absolute pro at being able to know what layers to put on the map, to actually tell that story and tell how it's developing and where different weather systems are going and whatever the rest of the stuff is that's on that screen. Storytelling is key here, but it's also key when you start looking at the kind of story format that I was talking about. So again, it's all about kind of creating that narrative. But the story format has grown, that it's basically a snippet of what is happening throughout people's days. And it's a really powerful way of telling a developing weather story as well. Or explaining a bit more about a behind the scenes or a bit more in depth about why something's happening or why there's uncertainty around whereabouts the thunderstorms are going to be. And it's often, it looks different to other content, but it has to, because that's the type of channel it's being put on. So there's no point it looking in a certain in the way of our Twitter graphics that are more formal and map-based, because this is the way people like to consume on these channels. I'll try not to speed up too much, otherwise I'm going really fast, but I'll try and bring it in on time. So, evergreen stuff. This is more around the longer life. So we're no longer telling people about the fact it's snowing, but we're telling people why it's snowing. And, bear with me. A lot of this is based on keyword research. So we know that people are searching for why is the sky blue, because we can see that from our analytics. So if we create that piece of content, then people will come to our channels and see our messaging. A lot of that messaging and a lot of that piece of content, goes on our YouTube channel, which is called Learn About Weather, which is worth subscribing to if you've not subscribed. And what it promises to deliver you is a piece of new content every single week around learning about the weather. And this plays into YouTube's hands and the strengths of YouTube, because YouTube is a channel that basically it relies on people subscribing to something that they're interested in. If you're delivering regular content, when you say that it's going to appear, then it's a perfect place to capture this sort of stuff. And again, I talk about the different formats. Well, we use different formats for this as well. It doesn't only speed up production, but it really helps to think about how am I going to portray this story? Can it be an amazing weather? Can it be an understanding weather? And they've all got their different quirks, but all that work on YouTube. So we don't just visualize the weather, we visualize climate data as well. You'll probably know better than I do about the amount of historical data that we've got in our National Climate Information Centre. The thing when it gets really exciting is actually when it becomes really, really relevant to people. So when's the hottest day? When's the coldest day? But tie that in with other stuff that's going on in the real world, like Glastonbury. When was the wettest Glastonbury? Oh, it just so happens that I'm going next week. Actually, it becomes relevant and timely for me. So you're really making use of that data and beginning to bring the kind of information to life. And you just so happen then to be tying it in with a forecast at the same time. We also know that every year, this is a really, really popular talking point. So global temperature. In this instance, again, we took the story. We knew what the narrative was. The narrative was that one of 2 warmest years on record was 2016, and that there's an increase. And we visualized that in different ways. This was one of them. So this went out across various different social channels and in various different formats. We also did presented explainers that talked through this data, and we also produced blog posts. Another thing that we did was actually allow people to interact with that data. So this was done by the Met Office Informatics Lab. And this allowed people to interrogate that data in terms of, in fact, that sounds really funny, interrogate that data. I don't know what that means either, but it's as good as hyper. Just run with it. So they could interrogate that data, and then that meant that they could spin a globe and see what was going on over what years. But it made it more interesting and engaging. So that was done by a team, the Met Office Informatics Lab that I mentioned. And I actually joined them to start with. So they've been running for a couple of years now. One of the first projects that we did was around trying to experience the weather or visualize the weather in a different way, so not just a flat map. And some of you may well have seen this, but this was a project that allowed you to actually fly through some of the model data that was being kicked out of the supercomputer. And you could also do that in VR. And I should explain that the Informatics Lab's a small team of mixed skills, so scientists, coders, designers that are aiming to tackle problems really, really quickly and create prototypes and basically test new technology with a view to moving forward. Some of the other things they've done are around Amazon Alexa, and it's worth checking out on the website if you've not. And then most recently, the WeatherBot. The exciting thing is that it no longer becomes a visual design challenge. It's actually a tone of voice challenge and a kind of persona challenge, and those interactions really have to be considered. But what this does do is begin to bring in that personalization of weather content. And then there's the Disco Rhino, but that's something that I was involved in, and that's a whole different thing. So we also have really strong links with universities. So looking at the kind of challenge that Andrew set, I wanted just to bring some of this in really quickly. So we have strong links with local universities. We also have just run a kind of nationwide design competition to bring our data to life and to communicate forecasts. That was done with YCN, which is a creative network. And we also work with D&AD, who are basically the kind of Oscars of design. And we work with their New Blood division and actually run sessions each year around communicating data. But the great thing is we're able to pull in some really good partners alongside us. So this year we worked with Instagram and presented a session with them. The year before that we worked with Twitter and Innocent. And the thing is, not only are we there to inspire the students, but we're also there to talk to the people that we want to consume our data. So I'm just going to show you a few of those little bits. So this was an example of how we're actually able to ask them. You know, this is the kind of ask the audience stuff, so we could get a bit of information back from them around how they want to receive stuff, or even if they care about the weather in the first place. So just quickly, I've got 3 projects I want to show you. This one's one of my favourites. This was done by Catherine Blake at Plymouth University, and she was looking at visualising the global temperature records. So whilst we did the blobs, she came up with a book that you didn't even have to open. You could look at the spine and you could see the warming throughout the years. And then once you open it up, she had also cut out, here, the different size relating to the temperature as well. So just a great way, a totally different take and something that I'd never even considered. Then there was something done by Daniel Bennett, again from Plymouth University, and this really looked at kind of, she created an app, but not only did she do the mock-ups, but she actually brought it to life as well. So she created proper prototypes of this, and it was really looking at making information relevant to the user and finding when weather windows were. So really beginning to make, but based on my daily decisions, what impacts the weather going to have on me. So she actually was really beginning to get to the kind of the sort of area that we're moving into and working with our app as well. And then Adam Marsh was another favourite. They're all my favourites. Oh, that was a Brucey reference, wasn't it? So Adam Marsh was Chelsea College of Art. What I liked about his stuff was that he'd actually done a survey. You know, it's not a big survey, but he actually found out that, you know, loads of people in his class like Instagram. Class is not the right term either, I wouldn't have thought. In his year, people love stories and live video. You know, he did this research. And then there are golden hours of posting. So he showed that and then came up with an idea of, well, actually, could you be using Instagram stories more, Met Office? And could that be a mix of forecasts? Could it be a mix of webcams? Could it be a mix of behind the scenes? Yes, it could, and yes, it is, to be honest. So, yeah, he hit it right on the head and really has driven that forward for us. So 5 things to consider in Roundup. So let's think about why people care, basically, rather than what it is you want to tell them. Number 2, the importance of knowing where your content will go. There's no point designing something a certain size when it's never going to work, or you're not going to be able to read it when you look at it on a social feed. Number 3, keep aware of trends and, really importantly, social changes. So are there any emerging channels? Do GIFs animate? What's the preferred size on feeds? Try new things and see if they work. Make sure you've got the headspace to try new things and see if they work. And you can only do that by assessing feedback as well. And then design for and test on mobile. So make sure that whatever you're creating, you get out your phone and make sure that it looks good on there before you actually send it into the real world. That's it. It's whistle stop. Sorry, it was a bit rushed, but...
Thanks for us. I think that was really great. Does anyone have a very quick question for us? Just in the middle.
If it's too hard, I won't answer it, so make it easy.
It's a comment and a question. First of all, I'm going to disappoint you because I don't use any of your apps.
I'm not
the second
disappointed.
thing is when I look at the Met Office website, it is so complicated. I realise why I don't look at it very often, but luckily I don't live in the UK and I don't have to use it. We've seen lots of fancy graphics here today, and it's all about graphics and design. And it reminds me of things I see on the internet sometimes connected with the weather, in which I think, yeah, that's a really good presentation, but does it help me as a weather user? And the answer is often no. My question is, do you have any meteorological training? If not, do you think you should? And is there any meteorological input into all this? Have you ever spoken to, or have you ever, not have you ever, but how much
It's bordering on a
credence do you
slur.
give to the user?
But carry on.
Basically, it's the user I'm thinking about. It's clever graphics, but in the end, it's somebody out there who wants to make a weather decision. And a forecast where the person it's confusing or the person can't make a decision is pretty well useless.
So I'm only going to answer the first bit, to be honest. And the content I showed you is not aimed at you, basically. So the content is aimed at other people. There is content that's aimed at you, but it isn't that I'm showing you. I do have some meteorological training. I actually think it's a big advantage not knowing too much, you know? I think that's a huge advantage because that's where most people are, not knowing too much. So if I'm catering to those needs, then I think that's a great thing.
All right, well, I'm sure there's lots... Yeah, that really launches a lot of discussion, which I think we can hopefully have it at the reception. I just wanted to wrap up and say a huge thank you to all of the speakers. I apologise for my poor chairing and not keeping to time, and that's really just because I was interested in what everyone had to say, so I'm sorry that I didn't cut them off. I think this has been a really great, we've had such a diverse range of talks, but I think that's been really great, and it's been really great to talk to each other and hear what each other had to say. I'm certainly keen to take that further. If you think there are opportunities to do that at the meetings or through the society, then please do get in touch with me, and let's see what we can do with that in mind. So thanks very much, and I'll hand over.
Gentlemen, we're just going to connect the system back up so I can get some slides running. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Weather Photographer of the Year competition that's been a joint initiative by the Royal Meteorological Society and the Royal Photographic Society. And my name is Michael Pritchard. I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Photographic Society. Liz, unfortunately, has got another engagement now, so I'm standing in for Liz. There we go. So just a few brief words about the Weather Photographer of the Year. It was a competition that the Society, both the Royal Meteorological Society and the RPS, launched earlier this year. It's in the second year, and we had a very successful first year. This year we're even bigger and better. So you'll see when you go through to the reception, 48 images and two boards telling you a little bit about the competition and where all the entries came from. We've got 48 finalists who are there in the other room, which you can see in just a moment with a glass of something in your hand. We had entries from over 60 countries, which is up on last year. The entries were up on last year as well. And we had over 2,000 votes from the public on their favourite image. So one of the challenges for you is to go around all 48 and look for the one that you like and see whether that matches the public vote. So, from the two societies' points of view, one of the reasons that we do the competition is that it raises awareness about meteorology and photography. I expect if I asked you to put your hand up now and asked you how many of you take pictures of weather phenomena, I suspect it would be quite a large number of you. There's all hands waving up. Thank you for supporting that. So, you're the professionals, you're the people with a particular interest in weather, and we attracted members of the public, inevitably amateur photographers, but also professionals and people working within meteorology and looking at weather from a professional perspective. And what that's led to is an enormous amount of coverage in the press. I suspect there's going to be a lot more tomorrow. So we've been on BBC, Guardian, Daily Mail, and you can read the others for yourself also. So I'm going to show you. So these are the judges. Liz Bentley, Chief Exec of the Royal Meteorological, myself, Matt Clark, editor of the Royal Meteorological Weather magazine, Matt Taylor, one of the BBC weather presenters, Ben Cherry, who was last year's overall winner and gained the title of Weather Photographer of the Year, and Sue Brown, who's a fellow of the Royal Photographic Society and a good photographer in her own right. So those were the selectors. You should now be seeing, I would hope, a view of the shortlisted entries. If not, don't worry, because I'm not going to keep you for too much longer. Is it going to come, David, or...? Fantastic. So what you're going to see in just a moment are just a very quick overview of the 48 shortlisted images. You can see the full-size pictures in the reception in a moment or two. So they range from the very dramatic through to the much more gentle types of photograph. And it's really people's own interpretation of different weather phenomena, but also the impact of weather on people around the world. And those were the two objectives for the competition. And when you go through into the reception and look at the images on the boards there, you'll see a short bit of information about the meteorology that the image shows, but you'll also see a statement from the photographer as well, explaining where and how they took the image, what inspired them to take the image. And for those of you that are perhaps more into your photography, you'll also see the technical information, what the camera was, what the smartphone was even, because there's a smartphone image in there also, and what the technical settings were as well. So if we move on now, finally, just to look at the winners of the competition. And this was the public's favourite. You can make your own decision as to whether it's your favourite. So congratulations to Scott Robertson for the Fogbow photograph shown here. And that received 2,000 votes from members of the public. We split the competition into two main categories, the 16 and under category and 17 and above. And this was the runner-up in the 16 and under category, Marco Mazzio, White Cloth of Snow. So congratulations, Marco, for your photograph. And there will be a rather special camera coming your way very shortly. This is the winner of the 16 and under. We've all been there, haven't we? So congratulations to Louisa Imazio. We think they're brother and sister, but we're not quite sure. So congratulations, Louisa, for that. And then if we move on to the 17 and over category, and in third place we have Merval Adumu for Frozen Full. And there's a really interesting explanation around what you're seeing in this picture, which I'm not going to attempt to explain. I could probably tell you some of the photography, but I'll let you read that as well. So congratulations, Marvel, for your third placed photograph. And second place in the 17 and over category was this rather stunning photograph from Michelle Palazzo, the Flatiron building, I'm sure many of you will know it, in New York in a blizzard. And then first place was Adrian Theze for the Eye of the Storm. And you're looking at the digital projection here. When you look at the print itself, you'll see a lot more in that. So congratulations, Adrian, for gaining first place in the 17 and over category. And now, the moment of truth, I guess, for one person anyway. We're going to show you the overall weather photographer of the year for 2017. It's a stunning picture. It's a 10-second exposure, but as the photographer explained, it was something that he was amazed to capture. And again, you can read his explanation for that. So I'd like to present Mike Olbinski's Superstrike for overall weather photographer of the year 2017. I think a big round of applause for Mike. It's a stunning photograph, just from the photographic perspective and how he achieved the picture. From the meteorology, all of the judges were bowled over by it, so it's a very worthy winner, and I hope we'll get Mike to be one of the selectors for next year's competition. Now, if these images have inspired you, and the other 48 have, you can see 12 of them in this very special calendar that the Royal Meteorological Society has produced. There's an A4 version and an A3 version, so there are copies on sale when you go to the reception. So if those have inspired you, you've got Christmas coming up, then think about buying a calendar. Friends, family, and enjoy those images in your own home or office. So congratulations to all of our entrants, all 48 of you, and to our winners. It's been a great competition this year. The standard's been incredibly high, and we'll announce the 2018 competition in the spring of next year. So thank you. The reception takes place, it's signed for you, but it's sort of round and over in the building at the back of this one. Follow the signs, and there's refreshments there, and do enjoy the photographs. Thank you for your attention.